In medieval life, bread was not a topic of debate or concern. It was simply there, present at every meal, across every season, and within every household. From peasants working the fields to craftsmen in small towns, bread formed the steady base of daily nourishment. It was eaten in the morning, carried into the fields, shared at midday, and finished in the evening by the hearth. No one paused to question whether it would sit well in the body, because experience had already answered that question through generations of ordinary living. Loaves differed by region and wealth, sometimes darker, sometimes coarse, sometimes mixed with other grains, yet the role of bread remained the same. It filled the stomach gently, supported long hours of work, and asked for nothing in return except time to eat. Children grew up with it, elders relied on it, and no special language surrounded its consumption. Bread was not indulgence, nor was it restriction. It was routine. This everyday presence shaped how people related to food itself. Eating was not rushed, measured, or feared. Bread was broken by hand, chewed slowly, and consumed alongside simple meals that followed the rhythm of the day. In this setting, digestion was not a problem to be solved. It was a quiet background process, unnoticed precisely because it worked. Bread belonged to life in the same way walking, sleeping, and breathing did. Nothing about it felt experimental, fragile, or demanding, and that quiet reliability defined its place in daily life. Today, bread still sits on tables and shelves, but the relationship feels different. Many people eat it out of habit rather than comfort, and often notice a heaviness that follows. A meal that looks familiar no longer brings the same sense of ease. Hunger returns quickly, or the body feels unsettled in ways that are difficult to explain. This experience is so common that it has become normal, even though it quietly contrasts with what bread once represented. Modern life has changed how bread fits into the day. Meals are faster, portions are uniform, and bread is often eaten without pause or attention. It fills space on the plate, but rarely provides a feeling of satisfaction that lasts. For some, it brings bloating or fatigue. For others, it simply feels empty, as though something essential is missing. These sensations are rarely dramatic, yet they accumulate over time and leave a subtle sense of discomfort. What matters here is not blame or diagnosis, but recognition. Many people sense that bread has become something to manage rather than enjoy. This feeling does not come from imagination or weakness. It emerges from daily experience, repeated quietly over years. When something once simple becomes complicated, it invites a natural question. If bread was once easy to live with, then something must have changed along the way, and understanding that change is where the story continues. To answer it, we must look beyond the loaf itself and examine what quietly transformed wheat over time first. For most of human history, wheat was not a single, fixed thing. It was a living crop that changed slightly from place to place, shaped by soil, weather, and the hands that tended it. Medieval farmers did not plant wheat expecting every stalk to look the same or behave the same. Fields contained variety by default. Some plants grew taller, some shorter. Some ripened earlier, others later. This diversity was not planned in charts or laboratories. It emerged naturally as wheat adapted to local conditions over many seasons. These landrace grains were deeply tied to where they were grown. Wheat from a damp valley behaved differently than wheat from a dry hillside. In colder regions, grains developed resilience. In warmer areas, they adapted to longer growing seasons. Farmers selected seeds year after year based on what survived and what fed their families well. Over time, This quiet selection created wheat that worked with the land and, just as importantly, with the people who ate it. Because of this natural variation, medieval wheat was never pushed to perform one single function. It did not need to rise high, stay soft for days, or travel long distances. It needed to nourish, to store reasonably well, and to be dependable. The grain still contained its full structure, and nothing was separated or removed before it reached the mill. When turned into bread, it carried with it the memory of its place of origin. This closeness between land, grain, and body created food that felt familiar and gentle. The body had grown alongside these grains for generations, and digestion followed that long relationship quietly and without conflict. Over time, this relationship began to change. As populations grew and cities expanded, the demands placed on wheat shifted. Bread was no longer produced mainly for nearby communities. It needed to be consistent, predictable, and suitable for large-scale distribution. To meet these needs, variety slowly gave way to uniformity. Wheat was selected less for how it adapted to local environments and more for how it behaved in controlled systems. This process did not happen out of malice. It was driven by practical goals. Farmers needed reliable yields. Millers needed grain that behaved the same every time. Bakers needed dough that rose predictably and quickly. Uniform wheat made all of this possible. Fields became more consistent. Harvests became easier to manage. Bread became cheaper and more widely available than ever before. Yet something subtle was lost along the way. As wheat became standardized, it also became less flexible. The grain no longer carried the same range of natural variation that once softened its interaction with the body. Instead of many slightly different grains, people began eating the same few types again and again. This consistency benefited production, but it quietly altered how bread felt once eaten. The change was gradual, almost invisible, but it set the stage for further transformations that would shape bread even more profoundly. To understand those changes, the next step is to look at what happened after the wheat left the field and entered the mill. After harvest, medieval wheat moved slowly through a process that respected its natural structure. Grain was taken to local mills powered by water or wind, where large stone wheels turned at an unhurried pace. These stones crushed the wheat gradually, breaking it open rather than tearing it apart. The entire grain passed through together. The outer bran, the inner starch, and the small germ at the center remained combined, becoming flour as a whole rather than in pieces. This slow grinding mattered more than it might seem. Because the stones moved steadily, they produced little heat. The grain stayed cool as it was milled, preserving its natural oils and balance. Nothing was stripped away to improve appearance or shelf life. The flour that emerged still carried fiber, fats, and subtle textures that slowed how it was absorbed by the body. When baked into bread, it asked for time to chew and time to digest, working gently rather than demanding speed. Stone-milled flour also varied slightly from batch to batch. Each harvest, each field, and each mill left a small imprint. This variability meant the body never faced the exact same grain again and again. Digestion remained flexible, adapting naturally to food that had not been forced into a narrow standard. Bread made this way did not overwhelm the system. It moved through the body steadily, releasing energy slowly and leaving a feeling of fullness that lasted. Eating felt complete, not rushed, and digestion followed that same calm rhythm. As demand increased and technology advanced, milling began to change. Speed became valuable. Mills grew larger and more efficient, using metal rollers instead of stone. These rollers crushed wheat quickly and repeatedly, producing very fine flour in a short amount of time. Heat built up during this process, altering the grain before it ever reached the oven. To prevent spoilage and extend storage, parts of the wheat were removed, especially those containing natural oils. What remained was a refined product that behaved very differently in the body. Without fiber and fats to slow digestion, bread made from refined flour was absorbed quickly. It felt light at first, but left the body searching for more soon after. The texture was soft and uniform, easy to eat without effort, yet that ease came with a cost. Energy arrived fast and faded fast. Satisfaction became brief. These changes were not made with harm in mind. They solved real problems of scale and supply. Faster milling meant more food for growing populations. Cleaner flour meant longer storage and easier transport. Yet efficiency altered the structure of bread in ways that were not immediately obvious. The grain was no longer allowed to prepare itself slowly for digestion. Instead, it reached the body already transformed by speed and heat. This shift in milling set the stage for another quiet change. Even with altered flour, bread could still be gentle if given enough time to develop. That missing element was not found in machines or fields, but in what happened after flour met water, when patience once played its final role. Before bread ever reached an oven, it spent most of its life resting. In medieval kitchens and village bakeries, dough was mixed and then left alone. Hours passed. Sometimes an entire night passed. During that quiet time, the dough was not idle. It was changing in ways that mattered deeply to the body, even if no one described it in scientific terms. Natural fermentation happened slowly because it had to. Bakers relied on wild yeast and bacteria already present in the grain and the air. As the dough rested, these living organisms fed on the sugars in the flour. In doing so, they gently broke down structures inside the dough. Proteins softened. Starches became easier to handle. Compounds that could irritate digestion were reduced long before the bread was ever eaten. This process was less like manufacturing and more like cooperation. Time did the work that the human body would otherwise have to struggle through later. By the time the bread was baked, much of the heavy labor of digestion had already begun. The loaf arrived at the table partly prepared. Fermentation also changed how bread felt. It developed depth, balance, and a steady quality that satisfied without overwhelming. People did not rush this stage because there was no benefit in doing so. Dough rested while daily life continued around it, becoming something easier to live with. This patience was not a culinary trend. It was simply how bread became bread for everyone, every day, without pressure or haste naturally. When fermentation is shortened, bread changes in subtle but important ways. Dough mixed and baked quickly has less time to soften and transform. The grain reaches the oven closer to its raw state, and much of the preparation that once happened on the counter is left for the body to handle instead. Without enough time, the natural breakdown of starches and proteins remains incomplete. The bread may look appealing and feel soft, but it often behaves differently once eaten. Energy rises quickly and falls just as fast. Fullness fades, and the digestive system feels busier than it should. These reactions are not dramatic, but they are noticeable, especially when bread is eaten often. Rushed fermentation also removes a quiet buffer that once protected digestion. Instead of arriving gently, bread arrives all at once. The body responds by working harder, and over time that effort can feel tiring. People may describe this as heaviness, fog, or discomfort without knowing why. The food itself seems familiar, yet the experience is less settling. This shift did not happen because time lost its value, but because speed gained importance. Bakeries needed to produce more bread in less time, consistency became essential, and waiting became inefficient. Shorter fermentation solved those challenges, making bread predictable and affordable. Still, the body notices what the clock removes. When time is taken away from dough, it does not disappear. It is simply transferred. The work that once happened slowly before baking now happens quickly after eating. Understanding this helps. When medieval bread reached the body, it arrived already prepared. The grain had grown slowly, been milled gently, and allowed time to change before baking. Because of this, digestion did not begin with effort. It began with recognition. The body met bread that felt familiar, steady, and manageable, shaped by processes that matched its own pace. Eating was rarely hurried. Bread was chewed thoroughly, often alongside simple foods, and digestion unfolded gradually. Energy was released slowly, supporting long periods of work without sudden drops. The stomach was not overwhelmed, and fullness arrived calmly rather than abruptly. There was no sharp contrast between eating and feeling well afterward. Bread blended into the rhythm of the day, supporting movement, rest, and routine without drawing attention to itself. This alignment mattered. The human digestive system is designed to work best when food arrives in stages, not all at once. Medieval bread supported that process by retaining its structure and complexity. Fiber slowed absorption. Natural fats softened digestion. Fermentation had already begun the work that the body would otherwise need to do on its own. Because of this, digestion felt quiet. When something works smoothly, it often goes unnoticed, and that was the case here. People did not speak about gut health or digestion because there was little reason to. Discomfort existed, but it was not widespread or routine. Bread did not demand adjustment or avoidance. It was simply part of life, as dependable as the seasons. This does not mean medieval diets were perfect or ideal. It means that bread, as it existed then, generally worked with the body rather than against it. That partnership formed over centuries of shared adaptation, and the body learned to trust it. Modern bread often feels different, not because the body has changed, but because the relationship has. Today, bread tends to arrive quickly and in large amounts, made from flour that has been refined and prepared for speed rather than ease. When eaten, it can feel heavy or unsettling, even when portions are modest. Fullness may arrive suddenly, followed by a sense of discomfort or fatigue that lingers longer than expected. These reactions are rarely dramatic, but they are persistent. People notice bloating, fogginess, or a feeling that bread sits awkwardly in the body. This experience does not mean bread is harmful or that something is wrong with the person eating it. It reflects a mismatch between how bread is made and how the body prefers to receive food. When preparation is rushed, the digestive system is asked to compensate. Modern bread also lacks the natural signals that once guided digestion. Without texture and resistance, it is eaten quickly. Without fiber and fermentation, it moves rapidly through the body. The digestive system responds by working harder in a shorter span of time. Over repeated meals, this effort can feel like strain, even if nothing appears outwardly wrong. Understanding this difference brings clarity rather than concern. It explains why bread can feel familiar yet uncomfortable at the same time. The food has not become foreign, but the processes surrounding it have shifted. Recognizing that shift opens space for reflection, not pressure. It allows people to consider their experiences with curiosity instead of blame, and prepares the ground for a calmer relationship with food moving forward. Understanding how bread once fit naturally into daily life helps explain why modern eating can sometimes feel confusing or unsatisfying. This knowledge is not about rejecting the present or romanticizing the past. It simply offers context. When people notice discomfort, fatigue, or restlessness after eating, it can create quiet stress or self-doubt. Looking back shows that these experiences are not personal failures. They are signals shaped by how food is produced and prepared. Awareness softens the experience. It allows daily routines to feel less tense, replacing frustration with understanding and patience. A simpler relationship with food begins with removing pressure. It does not require strict rules, labels, or constant correction. Medieval bread worked because it was part of life, not a problem to solve. People ate, worked, rested, and moved on. That ease is what many people miss today, not a specific ingredient or method. When food is understood rather than feared, the body often responds with calm. Meals become moments of grounding instead of calculation. This shift does not demand immediate change. It begins with noticing how different foods feel, without judgment. Curiosity replaces anxiety. Trust rebuilds slowly. Food does not need to be perfect to be supportive. What matters is alignment, not control. By understanding how time, simplicity, and preparation once shaped everyday nourishment, it becomes easier to approach modern food with balance. The goal is not to go backward, but to move forward with less tension, allowing eating to feel steady, familiar, and human again.